Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the long hallway of Nellis Air Force Base, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly against the polished floor. At 42, she had been cleaning these same corridors for 8 years, invisible to most of the pilots and officers who walked past her every day. To them, she was just another face in the background, someone who emptied their trash cans and mopped their floors. But Maria carried a secret that would have shocked every person on that base. Hidden beneath her janitor's uniform and quiet demeanor was the heart of a fighter pilot, someone who had once soared through the skies in the most advanced aircraft ever built. As she cleaned the windows overlooking the flight line, Maria watched the F-22 Raptors taxiing for their morning missions. Her chest tightened with a familiar ache as she observed the sleek gray aircraft moving like deadly predators across the tarmac. She knew every curve, every system, every sound those planes made. She had once been one of the elite few qualified to fly them. The other janitors often wondered why Maria always volunteered to clean the pilot briefing rooms in the command center. They assumed she was just eager for overtime pay. They had no idea that she was listening, learning, staying connected to the world she had been forced to leave behind. "Hey, Maria," called out Staff Sergeant Johnson as he passed by with a cup of coffee. "Don't forget to empty the trash in the communications room today. The Admiral is coming for an inspection this afternoon." Maria nodded with a small smile. Admiral Rebecca Walsh was legendary on the base, a former Navy pilot who had transitioned to overseeing joint operations between the Air Force and Navy. She was known for her sharp mind and her ability to spot talent wherever it hid. Maria had always been careful to stay out of her way during previous visits. As Maria made her way to the communications room, she passed a group of young pilots discussing their upcoming training exercise. Their voices were filled with excitement and nervousness, reminding her of her own early days in the cockpit. She had been just like them once, eager, determined, and absolutely certain that nothing could stop her from achieving her dreams. The communications room was buzzing with activity when she arrived. Radio chatter filled the air as controllers coordinated with aircraft scattered across the Nevada desert. Maria began her cleaning routine, but her ears were tuned to every transmission. She recognized the call signs, understood the technical jargon, and could picture exactly what was happening in the sky above. "Viper 21, you're cleared for approach on runway 09, came a voice from the radio. "Copy, Tower. Viper 21 on final approach," responded the pilot. Maria paused in her sweeping as she heard the strain in the pilot's voice. Something was wrong. She had heard that same tone thousands of times during her own flying days. It was the sound of someone fighting to maintain control of their aircraft. "Tower, Viper 21 is experiencing hydraulic issues. Request priority landing," the pilot transmitted, his voice now clearly tense. The air traffic controllers immediately sprang into action, clearing the runway and alerting emergency services. But Maria could hear something in the radio chatter that the others were missing. The pilot was downplaying his situation. She recognized the signs of someone trying to sound calmer than they actually were, probably to avoid causing panic. As she continued cleaning, Maria listened to the developing emergency. The pilot was Lieutenant Rodriguez, someone she had seen around the base but never spoken to. He was young, probably on one of his first solo missions in the F-22. The kind of situation that could make or break a pilot's career, or worse. "Viper 21, what's your status on backup systems?" asked the tower controller. "Backup hydraulics they're not responding properly," Rodriguez replied after a pause that was just a little too long. Maria's hands tightened on her mop handle. She knew that pause. It meant the backup systems weren't just not responding properly. They were probably completely failed. In an F-22, that created a very dangerous situation, especially for an inexperienced pilot. The radio crackled again. "Tower, I'm having trouble maintaining attitude control. The stick feels different." Maria's breath caught. Those words sent a chill down her spine. In her flying days, she had encountered a similar situation during a training exercise over the Pacific. A senior pilot had talked her through it, but it had been one of the most terrifying experiences of her life. Now, listening to Rodriguez, she could hear the same fear she had felt that day. The base controllers were doing their best, but Maria could tell they were following standard procedures for a routine hydraulic failure. They didn't understand the full severity of what was happening. The combination of systems that were failing created a scenario that required very specific knowledge and experience to handle safely. As she watched the controllers work, Maria felt a familiar stirring in her chest. It was the same feeling she had experienced countless times in the cockpit when faced with a challenging situation. The need to act, to use her skills and knowledge to solve the problem. But she was just a janitor now. No one would listen to her. No one even knew who she really was. The radio chattered with more transmissions as Rodriguez struggled to bring his aircraft under control. Emergency vehicles were racing toward the runway, their lights flashing in the distance. Maria could see the tension on every face in the communications room as they realized this wasn't going to be a routine emergency landing. "Tower, I'm losing altitude faster than I can compensate," Rodriguez transmitted, his voice now showing clear signs of stress. Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her mind, she could picture exactly what was happening in that cockpit. The control surfaces weren't responding the way they should. The pilot was fighting against systems that were working against him instead of with him. There was a specific technique for handling this type of failure, but it wasn't in any standard manual. It was something you learned through experience, through years of flying, and understanding how these magnificent machines behaved when everything went wrong. She looked around the communications room. Everyone was focused on their equipment, following protocols, doing everything by the book. But sometimes the book wasn't enough. Sometimes you needed someone who had been there before, someone who understood not just the theory, but the reality of what it felt like when a $65 million aircraft decided to stop obeying the laws of physics. The radio crackled again, and Rodriguez's voice came through, tighter than before. "Tower, I need help here. This isn't working." Those words hit Maria like a physical blow. She knew that tone. It was the sound of a pilot who was running out of options, someone who was staring at the very real possibility that they might not make it home in that moment. 8 years of hiding. 8 years of pretending to be someone she wasn't. 8 years of silence all came crashing down around her. Maria's hands trembled as she gripped her mop tighter, listening to the increasingly desperate radio calls from Lieutenant Rodriguez. The young pilot's voice was breaking through the static, filled with barely controlled panic as his F-22 Raptor fought against him like a wild animal. "Tower, my flight controls are getting worse. I can't maintain level flight," Rodriguez transmitted, his breathing audible over the radio. The air traffic controller's voice remained steady, but Maria could hear the tension underneath. "Viper 21. Emergency crews are standing by. Can you attempt a controlled descent to runway 09? "Negative, Tower. Every time I try to descend, the aircraft wants to roll left. I'm fighting it with everything I've got." Maria knew exactly what was happening. The combination of hydraulic failures Rodriguez was experiencing created a specific aerodynamic problem that most pilots had never encountered. The aircraft's fly-by-wire system was compensating incorrectly, creating a feedback loop that made the plane increasingly unstable. She had seen it once before, during her final month of active duty, when a test pilot had barely managed to land safely by using a technique that wasn't in any manual. Around the communications room, the controllers were doing everything they could, but Maria could see they were reaching the limits of their standard procedures. They were treating this like a routine hydraulic failure, not understanding that Rodriguez was dealing with something far more complex and dangerous. Viper 21. Try reducing power to 60% and see if that helps with stability, came the instruction from the tower. Roger, reducing power, Rodriguez replied. Maria bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. That was exactly the wrong advice. Reducing power would make the stability problem worse, not better. The young pilot was about to find himself in an unrecoverable situation, and no one in that room understood what was really happening. She looked around desperately. The senior controller was focused on his screen, coordinating with emergency services. The other technicians were monitoring various systems, all following their training perfectly. But their training hadn't prepared them for this specific combination of failures. The radio crackled again. Tower, that made it worse. The aircraft is becoming uncontrollable. I'm fighting just to keep it in the air. Rodriguez's voice now carried a note of genuine fear, and Maria could picture him in the cockpit, sweat pouring down his face as he wrestled with controls that no longer did what they were supposed to do. She had been in that exact situation once, and she knew he had maybe 2 or 3 minutes before the aircraft became completely uncontrollable. Listen carefully, she whispered to herself, remembering the words that had saved her life years ago. Power to 85%, nose slightly down, and use the rudder to counter the roll, not the stick. As if he had heard her thoughts, Rodriguez transmitted again. Tower, I'm running out of ideas here. This bird is not responding to anything I'm trying. The senior controller looked up from his console, his face pale. Viper 21, maintain current heading and altitude. We're consulting with the F-22 technical team. But Maria knew there wasn't time for consultations. Every second that passed, Rodriguez was burning fuel and fighting a battle he was slowly losing. The technical team would eventually figure out the right solution, but it might take 10 or 15 minutes to work through their manuals and computer simulations. Rodriguez didn't have that long. She watched the controllers frantically making phone calls, trying to reach experts who could guide them through this emergency. Meanwhile, the radio continued to carry Rodriguez's increasingly desperate updates about his deteriorating situation. Tower, I've got maybe 5 minutes of fuel left before I have to make a decision about ejecting, Rodriguez reported, his voice now showing clear signs of exhaustion from fighting the unresponsive controls. Maria's heart pounded as she realized that no one in the room understood the urgency of the situation. They were still treating this like they had plenty of time to work through the problem methodically, but she knew that with the specific failures Rodriguez was experiencing, his aircraft could become completely uncontrollable at any moment. She thought about her own crash 8 years ago, the accident that had ended her career and changed her life forever. She had been flying a test mission, pushing the boundaries of what the F-22 could do, when multiple systems had failed simultaneously. The investigation had cleared her of any wrongdoing, but the injury she sustained had ended her flying career. The military had offered her a desk job, but she couldn't bear the thought of being around aircraft she could no longer fly. So, she had quietly resigned her commission and disappeared into civilian life, taking the first job she could find that would pay her bills. Cleaning floors at an Air Force base hadn't been part of any life plan, but it had allowed her to stay close to the world she loved, even if she could no longer be a part of it. Now, listening to Rodriguez's situation deteriorate by the minute, Maria realized that all those years of hiding, all that accumulated knowledge and experience, had been preparing her for this moment. She was probably the only person within 50 miles who had the specific experience needed to save that young pilot's life. The radio crackled again. Tower, I'm losing hydraulic pressure completely now. The stick is getting heavier, and I can barely control the aircraft. Maria closed her eyes and made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't stand by and watch someone die when she had the knowledge to prevent it. Her career, her reputation, her carefully constructed new life. None of that mattered if Rodriguez didn't make it home. She dropped her mop and walked toward the senior controller's station. Her heart was racing, but her mind was crystal clear. This was what she had been trained for, what she had lived for during her years in the cockpit. This was why she had spent 8 years staying close to the world of military aviation, even as a janitor. "Excuse me," she said quietly to the senior controller. He looked up, clearly annoyed at being interrupted during a crisis. "Ma'am, you need to leave the communications room immediately. We're dealing with an emergency." "I know," Maria said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "And I think I can help." The controller's expression shifted from annoyance to disbelief. "Ma'am, this is a highly technical situation requiring specialized knowledge. Please step back and let us handle this." Over the radio, Rodriguez's voice came through again, now edged with desperation. "Tower, I need guidance right now. This aircraft is about to become unflyable." Maria looked directly at the controller. "Sir, I'm a former F-22 pilot with over 3,000 hours in type. Lieutenant Rodriguez is experiencing a specific combination of hydraulic and fly-by-wire failures that creates a unique stability problem. The standard procedures won't work for this situation." The controller stared at her in shock, his mouth slightly open. Around the room, other technicians had stopped what they were doing and were looking at the janitor, who had just claimed to be a fighter pilot. "That's impossible," the controller said. "I'm a janitor," Maria finished. "But I'm also the person who can save that pilot's life if you'll let me try." The radio crackled once more with Rodriguez's voice, now clearly strained with exhaustion and fear. "Tower, I don't think I can hold this much longer. The aircraft is starting to roll uncontrollably." Maria looked at the controller with steady eyes. "Sir, in about 30 seconds, Lieutenant Rodriguez is going to lose complete control of that aircraft. I can talk him through a technique that will allow him to land safely, but I need access to that radio right now." The senior controller looked at her for a long moment, then glanced at his team, all of whom were staring at this impossible situation. A janitor claiming to be a pilot, offering to save someone's life with knowledge that none of them possessed. Over the radio, Rodriguez transmitted what sounded like it might be his final message. "Tower, I'm losing it. The aircraft is entering an uncontrolled roll. I may have to punch out." Time had run out. The moment of decision had arrived, and everyone in that room was looking at Maria Santos, the quiet janitor who might be their only hope of bringing Lieutenant Rodriguez home alive. The communications room fell silent except for the static from the radio and the distant sound of emergency vehicles racing across the base. Every eye was on Maria as she stood beside the senior controller's station, her janitor's uniform a stark contrast to the high-tech environment around her. Senior Master Sergeant Collins, the lead controller, stared at her for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 seconds. Over the radio, they could hear Rodriguez's labored breathing as he fought to maintain control of his aircraft. "Ma'am, I don't know who you really are," Collins said finally, "but if you can help that pilot, then get on this radio right now." Maria moved quickly to the communication console. Her hands, which had been cleaning floors just moments before, now reached for the radio microphone with the practiced confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, this is..." She paused for a split second, realizing she was about to use a call sign she hadn't spoken in 8 years. "This is Phoenix. Do you copy?" The radio crackled with Rodriguez's surprised voice. "Phoenix? Who is Phoenix?" "Tower. I thought I was talking to the controller." "Rodriguez, listen to me very carefully," Maria said, her voice taking on the calm, authoritative tone she had learned during years of emergency situations. I'm a former F-22 pilot, and I've been in your exact situation before. You're experiencing a compound hydraulic failure combined with fly-by-wire compensation errors. The standard procedures won't work for what you're dealing with. Phoenix, how do you... Never mind. I don't care who you are right now. Can you help me get this bird on the ground? Maria felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as she slipped back into the role she had been born to play. Rodriguez, first thing, stop fighting the role with the stick. You're making it worse. The fly-by-wire system is overcompensating, and when you fight it with aileron input, you're creating a feedback loop. But if I don't fight the role, the aircraft will... Trust me, Maria interrupted. I know it goes against every instinct you have, but you need to use rudder only to counter the roll. Keep your hands light on the stick and let the aircraft find its own stability point. Around the communications room, the controllers were watching this impossible scene unfold. Collins had quietly activated the base-wide emergency frequency so that other aircraft in the area could monitor the situation and stay clear. Okay, Phoenix. I'm trying your technique, Rodriguez transmitted, reducing stick input and using rudder only. Maria could hear the skepticism in his voice, but also the desperation of someone who is running out of options. She closed her eyes and pictured the cockpit of an F-22, remembering exactly what Rodriguez was seeing and feeling right now. Good. Now, your power setting is critical. You need to increase to 85%. I know that sounds counterintuitive when you're having control problems, but the additional airflow over the control surfaces will help stabilize the aircraft. Phoenix, increasing power to 85%, Rodriguez acknowledged. There was a pause, and then his voice came back with a note of surprise. That's actually helping. The roll tendency is decreasing. Maria allowed herself a small smile. Now comes the tricky part, Rodriguez. You need to set up for approach, but you can't use normal procedures. Your aircraft is going to want to enter a roll pattern every time you change configuration. Are you familiar with the emergency descent technique called power-on glide? Negative, Phoenix. That's not something we covered in training. Okay, I'm going to walk you through it. This technique was developed for exactly your situation, but it's not in the standard manuals because it's only needed for very specific failure combinations. Senior Master Sergeant Collins leaned over to Maria. Ma'am, who are you? How do you know techniques that aren't in our manuals? Maria covered the microphone for a moment. Sergeant, I was a test pilot before I became a janitor. Some of us learned things that never made it into the official books. She keyed the microphone again. Rodriguez, you're going to maintain 85% power throughout your approach. Instead of reducing power and using flaps like normal, you're going to use a slightly nose-down attitude to control your descent rate. Phoenix, that sounds dangerous. What if I come in too fast? You'll be coming in faster than normal, but you'll have much better control authority. The key is to maintain that power setting right up until touchdown. Any reduction in power will destabilize the aircraft again. As Maria continued talking Rodriguez through the unconventional approach, word was spreading throughout the base that something extraordinary was happening in the communications room. The janitor everyone had ignored for 8 years was apparently a pilot, and she was saving someone's life using knowledge that no one else possessed. Phoenix, I'm lined up for final approach, Rodriguez reported, maintaining 85% power and using attitude for descent rate like you said. It feels weird, but the aircraft is much more stable. Perfect, Rodriguez. Now remember, when you flare for landing, you're going to reduce the nose-down attitude rather than reducing power. Think of it as leveling off rather than flaring. And whatever you do, don't pull the power back until after touchdown. Copy, Phoenix. Leveling off instead of flaring. maintaining power until touchdown. The tension in the communications room was palpable as everyone listened to Rodriguez's approach. Through the windows, they could see the F-22 in the distance, approaching the runway at an unusual angle and speed, but clearly under control. "Phoenix, I can see the runway. This still feels wrong, but the aircraft is responding to my inputs." "Trust your training and trust what I'm telling you," Maria said. "You're doing everything right. The aircraft wants to fly. You just have to let it fly differently than normal." As the F-22 approached the runway, Maria felt the familiar mix of pride and anxiety that came with talking someone through a difficult situation. This was what she had lived for during her flying career, the moment when experience and knowledge came together to solve an impossible problem. "Phoenix, I'm over the threshold, beginning to level off." "Perfect, Rodriguez. Hold that attitude and let the aircraft settle onto the runway. Don't try to force it down." Through the radio, they could hear the screech of tires as the F-22 touched down on the runway. The aircraft bounced once, then settled onto the pavement and began rolling down the center line. "Phoenix, I'm on the ground. The aircraft is under control." A cheer went up in the communications room as everyone realized that the emergency was over. Rodriguez was safe. His aircraft was intact, and they had just witnessed something that none of them would ever forget. "Outstanding work, Rodriguez," Maria said into the microphone. "Now reduce power to idle and let the aircraft roll to a stop. Emergency crews will meet you at the end of the runway." "Phoenix, I don't know who you are, but you just saved my life. How did you know exactly what to do?" Maria looked around the communications room at all the faces staring at her, with mixtures of amazement, confusion, and respect. She had just revealed a secret she had kept for 8 years, and there was no going back now. "Rodriguez, sometimes the right person is in the right place at the right time," she said. "Just focus on getting your aircraft safely parked. We can talk later." As Rodriguez signed off the radio, the communications room erupted in conversation. Everyone was talking at once, trying to understand what had just happened. The quiet janitor had just demonstrated knowledge and skills that none of them possessed, saving a pilot's life using techniques that weren't even in their manuals. But Maria barely heard the commotion around her. She was staring out the window at the F-22 rolling to a stop on the runway, thinking about the choice she had just made and what it would mean for the carefully constructed life she had built over the past 8 years. Within minutes of Rodriguez's safe landing, the communications room was buzzing with activity that had nothing to do with air traffic control. Word of what had happened was spreading through the base like wildfire, carried by radio chatter, text messages, and good old-fashioned word of mouth. Maria stood quietly beside the radio console, watching through the window as emergency vehicles surrounded Rodriguez's F-22 on the distant runway. She could see the young pilot climbing out of his cockpit, his legs probably shaky from the adrenaline and stress of the last 20 minutes. She knew exactly how he was feeling right now. Grateful to be alive, amazed that the aircraft had actually responded to the unconventional techniques, and probably wondering who Phoenix really was. Senior Master Sergeant Collins approached her cautiously, as if he wasn't quite sure she was real. "Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions. What you just did, that knowledge isn't something someone learns by reading books or watching videos. You saved that pilot's life with expertise that I've never encountered in 20 years of air traffic control." Before Maria could respond, the communication room door burst open, and Colonel Matthews, the base operations officer, strode in, his face flushed from running. Behind him came several other officers, all looking confused and demanding explanations. "What the hell is going on here?" Colonel Matthews demanded. "I'm getting reports that our janitor just talked one of our pilots through an emergency landing using techniques that aren't in any manual. Someone better explain this to me right now." All eyes turned to Maria, who was still wearing her janitor's uniform, with a name tag that simply read M. Santos. She looked at the growing crowd of officers and enlisted personnel who were staring at her with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. "Colonel," Senior Master Sergeant Collins said, "this is Maria Santos. She's been working as a janitor on this base for 8 years. 20 minutes ago, she stepped up to the radio and talked Lieutenant Rodriguez through an emergency landing using knowledge that none of us possessed." Colonel Matthews stared at Maria for a long moment. "Mrs. Santos, I need you to explain to me how a janitor knows advanced F-22 emergency procedures that my trained controllers don't know." Maria took a deep breath. The secret she had guarded for 8 years was about to come out completely, and there was no way to control how that information would be received or used. "Colonel, my name is Maria Santos, but my call sign used to be Phoenix. I was a major in the Air Force before I became a janitor. I flew F-22s for 6 years and logged over 3,000 hours in type, including 18 months as a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base." The room fell completely silent. Colonel Matthews's expression shifted from confusion to shock, to something that might have been recognition. "Phoenix," he said slowly. "Major Maria Phoenix Santos, the test pilot who was involved in the classified incident at Edwards 8 years ago." "Yes, sir," Maria replied quietly. "But the report said you were medically retired after that incident. What are you doing working as a janitor?" Maria looked around the room at all the faces staring at her. She had never wanted to have this conversation, but circumstances had forced her hand. "Colonel, I was medically retired due to injuries I sustained during a test flight. The incident was classified, so I couldn't discuss the details with potential civilian employers. After my retirement, I found it difficult to find work that utilized my skills. When I saw an opening for janitorial work here at Nellis, I took it because it allowed me to stay close to the world I loved, even if I couldn't be part of it anymore." Colonel Matthews rubbed his forehead, clearly trying to process this information. "Major Santos, I mean Mrs. Santos, you've been cleaning floors here for 8 years when you could have been teaching our pilots?" "Colonel, I wasn't cleared to discuss my background or my experience. The circumstances of my retirement made it complicated." Before Colonel Matthews could respond, the communication room door opened again, and this time, Admiral Rebecca Walsh entered. The room immediately snapped to attention as the senior officer surveyed the scene with sharp, intelligent eyes. "At ease, everyone," Admiral Walsh said. "Colonel Matthews, I need to speak with the person who just talked Lieutenant Rodriguez through that emergency landing. I monitored the entire event from the command center." Colonel Matthews gestured toward Maria. "Admiral, this is Maria Santos. This is complicated." Admiral Walsh looked at Maria with the kind of intense focus that made it clear why she had risen to flag rank. "Mrs. Santos, I listened to your radio work during that emergency. That was some of the finest pilot-to-pilot communication I've heard in 30 years of military aviation. Where did you learn those techniques?" "Admiral, I learned them during my time as a test pilot. Some of the procedures I used aren't in the standard manuals because they were developed for very specific failure modes that we encountered during developmental testing." "And your background is?" "Former Air Force Major, ma'am. F-22 pilot with test pilot training. I was medically retired 8 years ago and have been working here as a janitor since then." Admiral Walsh studied Maria for a long moment, and Maria could practically see the wheels turning in the Admiral's mind. This was a woman who had built her career on recognizing talent and understanding the value of experience. "Mrs. Santos, I need you to come with me to the command center. We need to debrief this incident properly, and I have some questions about your background and experience." As they prepared to leave the communications room, Senior Master Sergeant Collins approached Maria one more time. "Ma'am, I just want to say thank you. What you did today. Lieutenant Rodriguez is going home to his family tonight because of your knowledge and courage. Maria nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite sort out. Pride at having saved Rodriguez's life, fear about what would happen now that her secret was out, and something else, a feeling she hadn't experienced in 8 years. For the first time since her accident, she felt like a pilot again. As they walked toward the command center, Admiral Walsh spoke quietly to Maria. Mrs. Santos, I need you to understand that what happened today is going to generate a lot of attention. The techniques you used, the knowledge you demonstrated, that's not something the Air Force can just ignore. Admiral, I understand that my situation is unusual. I never intended for any of this to come out. I just couldn't stand by and watch someone die when I had the knowledge to prevent it. That decision you made to step forward, despite the personal cost, tells me everything I need to know about your character. Admiral Walsh said, Now I need to understand everything about your background, your experience, and why someone with your qualifications has been working as a janitor for 8 years. As they approached the command center, Maria saw Lieutenant Rodriguez walking toward them, still in his flight suit and looking somewhat shaky from his experience. When he saw Maria, his face lit up with recognition and gratitude. You're Phoenix, he said, extending his hand. Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you. What you did up there, you saved my life. Maria shook his hand, seeing in his young face the same determination and passion she had felt during her own flying days. Lieutenant, you did the hard part. You trusted the techniques and executed them perfectly under extremely difficult circumstances. That takes real skill and courage. Ma'am, how did you know exactly what to do? Those techniques. I have never heard of anything like that. Admiral Walsh spoke up before Maria could answer. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Mrs. Santos has a background that we're just beginning to understand. Right now, I need both of you to come with me so we can properly debrief this incident and figure out what happens next. As they entered the command center, Maria realized that her life was about to change again, just as dramatically as it had 8 years ago when her flying career had ended. But this time, instead of losing everything she had worked for, she might actually be getting a chance to reclaim it. The command center at Nellis Air Force Base was a hub of controlled activity, with large screens displaying aircraft positions, weather data, and mission status updates. Admiral Walsh led Maria and Lieutenant Rodriguez to a secure briefing room where they could speak privately about the events of the day. Before we begin, Admiral Walsh said, settling into a chair across from Maria, I need to tell you that I've already made some phone calls about you, Mrs. Santos. Your personnel file makes for very interesting reading. Maria felt her stomach tighten. Her file contained information about the classified incident that had ended her career, details that she had never been able to discuss with anyone outside of a small circle of military investigators and medical personnel. Admiral, I understand that my situation is complicated. The circumstances of my retirement were unusual. Major Maria Santos, call sign Phoenix. Admiral Walsh read from a tablet. Graduated top of your class from the Air Force Academy. Distinguished graduate from pilot training. Selected for F-22 transition after demonstrating exceptional skills in advanced fighters. Completed test pilot school and was assigned to the F-22 developmental test program at Edwards Air Force Base. Lieutenant Rodriguez listened with growing amazement as Admiral Walsh continued reading from Maria's file. During your time as a test pilot, you participated in classified research into advanced flight control systems and contributed to the development of emergency procedures that are now part of the F-22 technical manuals. You received the Distinguished Flying Cross for your work on a classified test program that advanced the capabilities of the F-22 fleet. Maria remained silent, remembering those days when she had been pushing the boundaries of what the F-22 could do, working with engineers and other test pilots to make the aircraft safer and more capable for the operational pilots who would fly it in combat. And then, Admiral Walsh continued, 8 years ago, you were involved in a classified test flight that went wrong. The details are still classified, but the result was that you sustained injuries that ended your flying career and led to your medical retirement as a major. Yes, ma'am, Maria said quietly. Admiral Walsh set down the tablet and looked directly at Maria. What the file doesn't explain is why someone with your background and experience has been working as a janitor for 8 years instead of sharing that knowledge with the Air Force in some other capacity. Maria took a deep breath. This was the conversation she had been dreading for 8 years, the one that would force her to explain decisions that she wasn't sure she fully understood herself. Admiral, after my retirement, I was offered several positions within the Air Force and the defense industry. Desk jobs, training positions, consulting work. But I couldn't. I couldn't bear the thought of being around aircraft that I could no longer fly. It was too painful. So you chose to work as a janitor instead? I needed work, and the position here at Nellis allowed me to stay close to the flying community without having to directly confront what I had lost. I thought I could just blend into the background and live quietly. Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke up for the first time since they had entered the briefing room. Ma'am, with respect, what you did today proves that you never stopped being a pilot. The way you handled that emergency, the knowledge you demonstrated, that's not something you can fake or learn from books. Admiral Walsh nodded in agreement. Lieutenant Rodriguez is right. Mrs. Santos, what I witnessed today was not just technical knowledge, but the kind of instinctive understanding that comes from years of experience and natural talent. The Air Force needs that expertise. Maria looked between the Admiral and the young lieutenant. Admiral, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm not sure what you're suggesting. My flying days are over. The medical board was very clear about that. Mrs. Santos, I'm not talking about putting you back in a cockpit, although we should revisit your medical status. I'm talking about finding a way to utilize your knowledge and experience to help train the next generation of F-22 pilots. Admiral Walsh stood up and walked to the window overlooking the flight line, where F-22s were still conducting training missions in the afternoon sun. Do you realize that the techniques you used to save Lieutenant Rodriguez today aren't taught to our operational pilots? The knowledge you gained as a test pilot, the experiences you had, that's exactly the kind of real-world expertise our pilots need to handle emergency situations. Maria felt a stirring of something she hadn't experienced in 8 years. The possibility that her knowledge and experience might still have value, that she might still be able to contribute to the mission she had dedicated her life to. Admiral, even if what you're saying is true, my situation is complicated. The incident that ended my career involved classified programs. I'm not sure I'm even allowed to discuss some of the things I learned. Mrs. Santos, I have the clearances necessary to review your entire file, including the classified portions. I can tell you that the program you were involved in has been declassified, and the techniques you developed have already been incorporated into some of our training programs. What's missing is someone who can teach those techniques from personal experience. Lieutenant Rodriguez leaned forward eagerly. Ma'am, if you could teach other pilots what you taught me today, you could save a lot of lives. What happened to me up there? That kind of emergency is rare. But when it happens, pilots need to know how to handle it. Admiral Walsh returned to her seat and looked directly at Maria. Mrs. Santos, I'm prepared to offer you a position as a civilian instructor pilot with the F-22 training program. You would work with our most experienced pilots to develop and teach advanced emergency procedures based on your test pilot experience. Maria felt her heart racing as she considered what Admiral Walsh was offering. The chance to return to the world she had loved, to share her knowledge with a new generation of pilots, to be part of the mission again. It was everything she had thought she had lost forever. Admiral, that's an incredible offer. But I need to understand what this would mean. Would I be working with operational pilots or test pilots? Both, Admiral Walsh replied. We're establishing a new program to bridge the gap between test pilot knowledge and operational training. You would help develop curricula, work with instructors, and potentially fly with students as a safety pilot and instructor. Fly? Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Santos, I've reviewed your medical file. Your injuries were significant, but they don't necessarily disqualify you from flying in an instructional capacity. You would need to undergo a complete medical evaluation and flight check, but it's possible that you could return to limited flying duties. Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes as she realized what Admiral Walsh was offering. Not just a job, not just a chance to use her knowledge, but possibly a return to the cockpit she had thought she would never see again. Lieutenant Rodriguez reached over and placed a hand on her shoulder. Ma'am, 8 years ago, you lost your career because of an accident. Today, you saved my life because of the knowledge you gained from that experience. Maybe this is how you're supposed to use what happened to you, to help other pilots avoid the same fate. Admiral Walsh stood up again. Mrs. Santos, I don't need an answer right now. This is a big decision, and you should take time to think about it. But I want you to know that what you did today reminded everyone who witnessed it that real expertise and dedication can come from unexpected places. As they prepared to leave the briefing room, Admiral Walsh turned back to Maria one more time. Mrs. Santos, there's one more thing. The call sign Phoenix. Do you know what that means? Yes, ma'am. A phoenix rises from the ashes of its destruction. Exactly, Admiral Walsh said with a smile. Sometimes we have to lose everything we think we want in order to discover what we're really meant to do. Today, Phoenix, you rose from the ashes. The question now is what you're going to do with this second chance. As they walked back through the base, Maria looked around at the familiar surroundings with completely different eyes. 8 years ago, she had walked away from this world, broken and defeated. Today, she was being offered the chance to return. Not as the person she had been, but as someone who had gained wisdom and perspective from her journey through loss and recovery. The janitor's uniform she was still wearing suddenly felt like a costume she had been playing in, a disguise that had hidden her true identity, even from herself. For the first time in 8 years, Major Maria Phoenix Santos was beginning to remember who she really was. 3 weeks later, Maria stood at the entrance to the F-22 training facility at Nellis Air Force Base, wearing a flight suit for the first time in 8 years. The feeling was both familiar and strange, like putting on clothes that belonged to a person she used to be, but wasn't sure she still was. The medical evaluation had taken 2 weeks and had been more thorough than anything she had experienced during her active duty career. Doctors had examined every aspect of her physical and psychological condition, reviewing the injuries from her accident and assessing her current capabilities. The results had been better than anyone had dared to hope. Limited flight status approved for instructional duties, the flight surgeon had written in his final report. Subject demonstrates full recovery from previous injuries and shows exceptional knowledge retention and situational awareness. Now, as she prepared for her first flight evaluation with the F-22 training squadron, Maria felt a mixture of excitement and terror that reminded her of her very first solo flight as a student pilot 20 years earlier. "Major Santos," came a voice behind her. Maria turned to see Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the commander of the F-22 training squadron, approaching with a friendly smile. Colonel Mitchell was one of the most experienced F-22 pilots in the Air Force, with over 4,000 hours in the aircraft and combat experience in 3 different theaters. "Colonel Mitchell," Maria replied, extending her hand. Thank you for agreeing to conduct my flight evaluation. The pleasure is mine, Major. Admiral Walsh has told me quite a bit about your background and your recent heroics with Lieutenant Rodriguez. I have to admit, I'm curious to see how someone maintains their skills after 8 years away from the cockpit. As they walked toward the aircraft, Colonel Mitchell continued talking. I've reviewed your file, including the classified portions of your test pilot work. The techniques you developed during your time at Edwards have become standard procedures for several emergency situations. You probably saved more lives than you realize through that work. Maria looked at the F-22 they were approaching, feeling her heart rate increase as she got closer to the sleek, deadly-looking aircraft. It was exactly the same as the one she had flown years ago, but it might as well have been from another planet for how foreign it felt to her now. Colonel, I have to be honest with you. I'm not sure I remember how to do this anymore. 8 years is a long time to be away from flying, especially in an aircraft as complex as the F-22. Colonel Mitchell stopped walking and turned to face Maria. Major, let me tell you something. 3 weeks ago, you saved one of my pilots using knowledge and instincts that you thought you had lost. You did that while wearing a janitor's uniform and standing in a communications room you had never trained in. If you can do that, you can certainly remember how to fly. They completed their pre-flight inspection together, with Maria running through procedures that came back to her like muscle memory. Her hands moved automatically to check systems and components, and she found herself explaining potential problems and solutions to Colonel Mitchell with the same confidence she had possessed as a test pilot. Impressive, Colonel Mitchell said as they finished the inspection. You haven't missed a single item, and your explanations show that you understand not just the procedures, but the reasons behind them. As they strapped into their seats, Maria felt the familiar sensation of the F-22's cockpit surrounding her like a second skin. The displays came alive with information. The controls felt perfectly positioned under her hands, and for the first time in 8 years, she felt like she was home. Okay, Major. Colonel Mitchell's voice came through the intercom. This is your flight. I'm just along for the ride. Take us through a normal startup and taxi. Maria's hands moved across the controls with growing confidence as she brought the massive fighter to life. Engine start, systems checks, communication with ground control. It all came flooding back, as if she had flown yesterday instead of 8 years ago. Tower, Raptor 21, requesting taxi for training flight. Maria transmitted, her voice steady and professional. Raptor 21, taxi to runway 09, winds light and variable, cleared for takeoff when ready. As they taxied towards the runway, Colonel Mitchell spoke over the intercom. Major, your radio work sounds like you never stopped flying. Some pilots lose that crisp communication style when they're away from the cockpit for extended periods. Colonel, I've been listening to radio chatter every day for 8 years while cleaning the communications rooms. I guess I never really stopped thinking like a pilot. The takeoff was smooth and powerful, with the F-22's twin engines launching them into the Nevada sky with the kind of acceleration that pressed them back into their seats. As they climbed through 10,000 feet, Maria felt a profound sense of joy and relief that brought tears to her eyes. How are you feeling, Major? Colonel Mitchell asked. Like I'm remembering who I used to be, Maria replied honestly. For the next hour, they flew through a series of training maneuvers designed to test Maria's skills and assess her readiness to return to flying duties. Basic air work, emergency procedures, formation flying, and advanced combat maneuvers. Major, I want you to demonstrate the emergency technique you used to help Lieutenant Rodriguez, Colonel Mitchell said. Set up a simulated hydraulic failure and show me how you would handle it. Maria took a deep breath and began configuring the aircraft for the emergency simulation. As she worked through the procedures, she found herself explaining not just what she was doing, but why each step was necessary and how it differed from standard emergency procedures. The key insight, she said as she demonstrated the power-on approach technique, is understanding that the fly-by-wire system doesn't know how to compensate for this specific combination of failures. You have to work with the aircraft's natural stability instead of fighting against the computer's attempts to help. Outstanding, Colonel Mitchell said. Major, that explanation is clearer and more detailed than anything in our current training materials. You're not just demonstrating the technique, you're teaching the underlying principles that make it work. As they returned to base for landing, Maria realized that something fundamental had changed during this flight. She wasn't trying to reclaim her old identity as a test pilot or prove that she was the same person she had been 8 years ago. Instead, she was discovering that her experiences, both the triumphs and the failures, had made her into something new and potentially more valuable. Tower, Raptor 21, requesting landing. Full stop, Maria transmitted as they approached the airfield. Raptor 21, cleared to land runway 9, winds calm. The landing was smooth and precise, with Maria demonstrating the kind of aircraft control that came from years of experience and natural talent. As they taxied back to the flight line, Colonel Mitchell spoke over the intercom one final time. Major Santos, I've been flying F-22s for 12 years, and I've never seen someone return to the cockpit after 8 years away and perform at the level you just demonstrated. But more than that, your ability to explain complex concepts and teach advanced techniques is exceptional. As they shut down the engines and climbed out of the cockpit, Maria felt a sense of completion that she hadn't experienced since her accident. She had proven to herself that she could still fly. But more importantly, she had discovered that her years of struggle and self-doubt had given her something valuable: the ability to connect with other pilots who were facing their own challenges and uncertainties. Colonel Mitchell walked around the aircraft to where Maria was standing, still wearing her helmet and flight gear. Major, I'm going to recommend you for immediate assignment to our instructor pilot program, but I also want to discuss something else with you. What's that, Colonel? We need someone to develop a new curriculum for teaching advanced emergency procedures to our operational pilots. Based on what I saw today, you're not just qualified for that job. You're the perfect person for it. As they walked back toward the squadron building, Maria realized that Admiral Walsh had been right about the phoenix rising from the ashes. She wasn't returning to her old life or her old identity. She was becoming something new. Someone who could use both her triumphs and her failures to help others achieve their own success and avoid the pitfalls that had once derailed her own career. 6 months later, Major Maria Santos stood at the podium in the F-22 Training Center's main auditorium, looking out at an audience of 50 pilots from bases across the United States. These were some of the Air Force's most experienced F-22 pilots, squadron commanders, and instructor pilots who had come to Nellis to learn the advanced emergency procedures that had grown out of her work as a test pilot. "Good morning, everyone," Maria began, her voice carrying the confidence that had developed over months of teaching and sharing her hard-won knowledge. "My name is Major Maria Santos, call sign Phoenix, and 6 months ago, I was working as a janitor in the building next door." A ripple of surprised laughter went through the audience. Most of them had heard some version of the story about the janitor who had saved Lieutenant Rodriguez, but hearing it directly from Maria still had the power to surprise people. Today, we're going to talk about something that isn't in any of your manuals. How to handle the kind of emergency that shouldn't be survivable, but can be if you understand what your aircraft is really trying to tell you. Behind her, a large screen displayed technical diagrams of the F-22's flight control systems. But Maria turned away from the slides and looked directly at her audience. Before we start talking about procedures and techniques, I want to tell you why this knowledge exists and why it matters. 8 years ago, I was a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base, working on a classified program to expand the F-22's capabilities. During one of those test flights, I experienced a catastrophic system failure that should have killed me. The room was completely silent as Maria continued her story. I survived that crash because a senior test pilot named Colonel James Harrison talked me through a technique that wasn't in any manual. He had learned it through years of experience and the kind of intuitive understanding that comes from pushing aircraft to their absolute limits. That technique saved my life, but the crash ended my flying career. Maria clicked to the next slide, which showed a photo of her in a hospital bed, connected to various machines and monitors. I spent 6 months in the hospital and 2 years in rehabilitation. The Air Force offered me desk jobs, but I couldn't handle being around aircraft I could no longer fly. So, I disappeared into civilian life and eventually ended up cleaning floors here at Nellis, trying to stay close to the flying community without having to confront what I had lost. She clicked again, and the screen showed a photo of her in her janitor's uniform, taken just a few months earlier. But hiding from who I was didn't make the knowledge go away. It didn't erase the lessons I had learned or the techniques that had saved my life. When Lieutenant Rodriguez found himself in a similar situation, I couldn't stand by and watch someone die when I had the knowledge to prevent it. The next slide showed Rodriguez's F-22 on final approach, demonstrating the unusual technique Maria had coached him through. The point of this story isn't that dramatic rescues make good training scenarios. The point is that the knowledge we're going to share with you today exists because pilots before you faced impossible situations and found ways to survive them. Every technique we'll discuss, every procedure we'll practice, represents someone's worst day, becoming someone else's salvation. Maria moved away from the podium and walked closer to her audience. How many of you have been in a situation where the standard emergency procedures weren't enough, where you had to improvise or think outside the box to solve a problem that your training hadn't prepared you for? Nearly every hand in the room went up. That's what separates good pilots from great ones, the ability to understand your aircraft so well that you can work with it even when everything goes wrong. What we're going to teach you isn't just a collection of emergency procedures. It's a way of thinking about flying that will make you better pilots in every situation. Over the next 4 hours, Maria and her team of instructors led the group through a comprehensive program that covered advanced emergency procedures, unconventional recovery techniques, and the kind of system-level understanding that allowed pilots to innovate solutions in real time. But more than the technical content, Maria focused on teaching the pilots how to think like test pilots, how to understand their aircraft as a complex system rather than just following procedures, and how to maintain control and situational awareness even when everything seemed to be falling apart. During the lunch break, Lieutenant Rodriguez, who was now one of Maria's assistant instructors, approached her with a smile. "Major, I just overheard 2 squadron commanders talking about requesting this training for all of their pilots. They're saying this is the most valuable instruction they've ever received." Maria looked around the room, where groups of pilots were engaged in animated discussions about the morning's lessons, sharing their own experiences with unusual emergency situations, and debating the finer points of various techniques. "Rodriguez, do you remember what you said to me 6 months ago about using your worst experience to help other pilots?" "Yes, ma'am. That maybe you were supposed to use what happened to you to help others avoid the same fate." "I think it's bigger than that," Maria said. "I think we're supposed to use our experiences, both good and bad, to make the entire community stronger. Every pilot in this room has knowledge and experience that could save someone else's life. But we don't always do a good job of sharing it." As the afternoon session began, Maria introduced the practical flying portion of the training program. Over the next 3 days, each pilot would fly with one of her instructors to practice the advanced techniques in actual aircraft, building the kind of muscle memory and confidence that could only come from hands-on experience. "Remember," Maria told the group as they prepared to head to the flight line, "the goal isn't to hope you never encounter these situations. The goal is to be so well prepared that if you do encounter them, you have the knowledge and skills to handle them confidently." That evening, Admiral Walsh joined Maria for dinner at the Officers Club to discuss the success of the training program and its future expansion. "Major, I've been getting calls from wing commanders across the Air Force requesting this training for their pilots. What you've developed here is exactly what we needed. A way to bridge the gap between test pilot knowledge and operational flying." "Admiral, I couldn't have done this alone. The team of instructors we've assembled brings together experience from test flying, combat operations, and training command. It's that combination of perspectives that makes the program work." Admiral Walsh nodded thoughtfully. "Major, I have a proposition for you. We want to expand this program beyond just the F-22 community. Every advanced aircraft in our inventory has similar knowledge gaps between what test pilots learn and what operational pilots are taught. Would you be interested in leading a cross-platform advanced emergency procedures program?" Maria considered the offer carefully. 6 months ago, she had been a janitor trying to hide from her past. Now, she was being offered the chance to influence training across the entire Air Force, to ensure that the kind of knowledge that had saved her life and Rodriguez's life would be available to every pilot who needed it. "Admiral, I'd be honored to take on that challenge, but I have one condition." "What's that?" "I want to keep teaching. Whatever administrative responsibilities come with the program, I want to maintain regular contact with pilots in the classroom and in the cockpit. That's where the real learning happens." Admiral Walsh smiled. "Major, that's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. The best teachers never stop being students themselves." As they finished their dinner, Maria looked out the window at the flight line, where F-22s were conducting night training missions under the bright Nevada stars. Each of those aircraft carried a pilot who was someone's son or daughter, someone's husband or wife, someone's parent or child. Her program would help ensure that those pilots had every possible tool and technique available to bring them home safely. 8 years ago, Major Maria Phoenix Santos had lost everything she thought defined her. Tonight, she realized that losing her old identity had allowed her to discover her true purpose. Not just to be a great pilot, but to help create great pilots. To ensure that the knowledge gained through decades of flying experience would never be lost, and to build a community where every pilot's experience contributed to everyone's safety. The Phoenix had indeed risen from the ashes, but not to become what she had been before. She had become something better, a teacher, a leader, and a guardian of the knowledge that kept pilots alive. And for the first time in 8 years, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, in the heart of Maria Santos's extraordinary journey, from a celebrated F-22 fighter pilot to a humble janitor at Nellis Air Force Base and back to a revered instructor. We uncover a profound life lesson. Never underestimate the hidden depths within every person, for our true value often lies buried beneath the surface of circumstance and appearance. Maria, once soaring through the skies as Phoenix, faced a devastating crash that shattered her dreams, forcing her into obscurity. For 8 years, she mopped floors and emptied trash, invisible to those around her, yet her expertise simmered quietly, waiting for the moment to ignite. When a young pilot, Lieutenant Rodriguez, teetered on the brink of disaster in his malfunctioning jet, Maria's suppressed knowledge erupted like a beacon, guiding him to safety with techniques born from her own near-fatal ordeal. This act of quiet heroism not only saved a life, but reignited her own, proving that adversity doesn't extinguish our gifts. It refines them. Her story tugs at the soul, reminding us that life's unexpected twists, loss, humiliation, reinvention, can forge unbreakable resilience. We all carry untold stories of triumph and trial, and sometimes the most unassuming individual holds the key to salvation. In a world quick to judge by titles or uniforms, Maria teaches us to look beyond the facade, to honor the wisdom earned through hardship, and to embrace second chances with open hearts. It's a call to self-reflection. How many janitors in our lives are unsung heroes waiting to rise? This emotional tale inspires us to persist, to value experience over ego, and to recognize that from the ashes of defeat, we can emerge stronger, more purposeful. If Maria's journey moved you as deeply as it did me, perhaps reminding you of your own hidden strengths or a time when someone unexpected changed your path, share your thoughts in the comments below. What life lesson has reshaped you? Let's discuss and uplift each other. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to join our community for more heart-stirring stories that reveal the extraordinary in the everyday. Your support keeps these tales alive. Thank you.